China. This is very much my position. It's a bit of a directional aspect, so it's a very much European Union perspective into the relationship between European Union and China. And you as potentially Chinese experts about the topic, it will be very interesting to know your perspective, your Chinese perspective about what I'm about to present. So let's start with the context. So the European Union and China, they have an enduring relationship. So since for 50 years that they have diplomatic relationships established in 75, and there's a huge economic independence. Within higher education and people flows, you have a very strong relationship. China is a major source of international students for the European Union. European students to China is growing since the pandemic at a very steady rate. And also you have like these talent influx, right? A lot of students that ended up going to European organizations and then come back to China. So you also have like these epistemic flows of knowledge. And so related to science and technology cooperation, we have this cooperation agreement signed in 1998. So it's been already more than 20 years. That is a formal agreement on matters of science and technology cooperation. And then you also see, and there's a nascent number of studies showcasing this growing interaction relationship within these two contexts on matters of research collaboration, cooperation, and intensity from through the flows. So then looking more at the present, and in the last years, what happened that China became a really global player in many areas, including in science. And so you can see that China became a global scientific powerhouse, and not only in matters of numbers of outputs, but also of the influence of those outputs. So, right now, between 2018 2020, you have 31 of the percent highly cited scientific outputs, and then you also have an increase of R&D expenditure in comparison to major competitors that will be the European Union, United States, and Japan. And so this has a profound implication for transnational governance, which is my theoretical lens. So this question that that from a participant in a global scientific action field, it became a proactive shaper of knowledge production, and also the norms that somehow influence the rule of the game, let's say, the rules of the game. And so the relevance of the research question. So one of the things that had been characterized since, let's say, 2018, and I'm going to showing the phases of this evolution, but in 2018 marked a very important moment where there was some reconsideration about this relationship between these two contexts. And so there's this aspect that China is being considered as a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. And so this has been playing in different areas, including in science at the moment. And so based on this context, having this as a framework, I question, okay, so how has this cooperation evolved institution from 98 to the present, giving this kind of almost critical, I will not call it critical juncture, but a critical point in time. So what is out there and what is still missing, and where my study contributes to the future? So there's been a lot of research on knowledge and research security aspects, but this literature has been mainly looking at national case studies, European national contexts with China, or through the eyes of international education professionals. And on the other hand, the higher education science policy scholarship, they have been analyzing this cooperation either via institutional logics, that is like a more broad analysis perspective, or via funding arrangements, or from a Sino perspective to the European Union. And so The study contributes in the sense that it offers a longitudinal policy and instrument-centered account. So I look at the bilateral agreements, but also what the instruments that give shape to this arrangement, and the operation of these arrangements as well. And so this is going to be more clear in the last phase that I'm going to present. So theory, I use a combination of transnational governance and gradual modes of institutional change. So I look at the science cooperation between these contexts as international governance arrangement, where coordination is not only diplomatic, so the treaties between the two contexts, but also programmatic, so the programs that give shape to them. And then the modes of gradual institutional change. So it's a theory that basically looks at that most of the change that happens in society is gradual, that unfolds gradually. And so they develop 4 different types of change. One will be the layering, so new rules on top of existing ones. Drift, so that rules that they stay for all the same, but their effects shift the direction of the institution. Conversion, when new purposes redefine the rules of the game, and then exhaustion, when institutions erode and they become less effective or sustainable over time. So data methods, I look these longitudinally document-based institutional analysis, where I look basically to all formal, official, and public documents that contain substantive aspects concerning the relationship of this context, but also major implications for science and innovation policy frameworks. This is still ongoing because I enter in a kind of a rabbit hole. The more that I go deep, the more documents I find, the more, so I'm kind of creating a document map where I kind of look at this evolution. But I'm confident, at least with the 4 phases that I'm going to showcase to you. Now, the time points I'm still reconsidering, and also I want to make sure that I have as much as information as possible to map this, both the 3D development and then what happens in the field through the program. So the results, these are basically the 4 phases of institutional change in EU-China science cooperation that I'm going to explain. So early phase of formation and early consolidation, a phase of expansion, phase of rearticulation, and the phase of recalibration, which is the most present one. Within the literature, these 2 phases have been more or less mapped, and the authors, my colleagues, they don't look at these as 2 independent phases, but I think they do, they deserve to be independent phases. And then the rearticulation is a kind of a phase that has been very silent in the literature. And there's been a lot of shifting, epistemological shifting, let's say, in the way that considering this cooperation that deserves to be seen and discussed. So the first phase, 98, was the cooperation agreement was signed. You see really the desire to create, like several structures that allow and to foster cooperation. And this is seen by the most important agreement, but also through the participation of Chinese organizations in the European Union Framework Program. So the major European regional science funding program in the region. And for instance, just to give you an idea, from 1998 to 2002, which is the first year that marked this cooperation, you had like around 70, 80 Chinese participant organizations. And then in the following period, that is from 2002 to 2004, that number doubled. So you have like around 160 Chinese organizations participating in the program, which you see is the early consolidation of these cooperation arrangements. So when you look in this phase, and this is mostly done with these EU-China summits, where you see continuous reaffirming a desire to enhance cooperation and to develop cooperation, and in a very kind of a neutral tone, in the sense that we just need to cooperate more and stronger and deeper, but not really considering what that cooperation should look like. And you see the renewal of the agreement, and so you see a very constant, stable pattern. Then from 2014, 2019, you see some shifts happening. And one of the things that is interesting is from 2013, the summits, they don't talk about, they don't even refer to science and technology cooperation. It's something that disappears from the documents. And you see a shift that is looking more at this, what the documents call these hegemonic ambitions of China, especially related to the Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative in 2013. And then you started to see positioning from the European Union looking at this initiative with a different understanding about the implications that we're going to have in other policy fields. And so the cooperation is, it's not just continued cooperation, but it's like, okay, what type of cooperation, how could be organized, to what extent, what kind of coordination settings could be done. And it's this question here in the new EU strategy on China, the ensuring a level playing field for research and innovation becomes a very central aspect in the policy framework. And then the most recent phase, which I call recalibration, through program-based arrangements. And what is interesting here is that so the last renewal of this cooperation agreement was done in 2019, and it was tacit renewal. So in the sense, like neither European Union or China said, "Oh, we want to stop the agreement." So basically, automatically, let's say, tacitly renovated. But you see a lot of questioning about where the direction should go. And while within the cooperation agreement itself, there's no really any shift, what you see is a shift within the framework program and the condition for participation of Chinese universities. And the most telling one is what happened in the Horizon 2025. So this is the last funding cycle, or the most recent funding cycle of the European framework program called Horizon Europe, that is going to be over in 27, and then of course going to have a new cycle. So there's a bar where Chinese universities are or organizations, but first, they're no longer eligible to participate in innovation actions. So these innovation actions are actions that allow organizations to have a proof of concept that then enters into the market. So research that can be commercialized. And so what happened, they told, okay, we have to redefine the relationship of Chinese organizations within these actions. And the explanation that they give is very brief, and this is something that I would like to talk with some policy officers within the European Union, that they concerns regarding the use of intellectual property generated under these publicly funded programs. So the way that then the commercialized research is going to be used. And so you see, start to see something shifting, and this mixed architecture where you see, okay, the cooperation agreement remains stable, but then you see a lot of action in the operationalization of this agreement. So looking back and tying it up with a theoretical proposition, what you see, it's a lingering process, basically. New rules on top of new rules that progressively shaping how cooperation is organized, although we have a new element here. And so since last year, there's a possibility that we are facing a drift or a conversion change within this relationship. So if you look at just the bilateral agreement, which remains formally in place, you see that there's some practical consequences within the cooperation. So the context is shifting. So potentially there's signs that there is going to be a drift within the bilateral agreement. But if you look at the program itself, you see a conversion. So you see that there's new rules that are defining this cooperation. But now this is very early to tell what will be the direction. But these two scenarios are very plausible to happen within the next few years. And so for implications for international governance, which is the the area that I'm interested about within this case. So this cooperation is very much a multi-instrument, multi-level arrangement. And it's interesting to see that within this diplomatic agreemental shift to more program-based structuring as a kind of model of governance. So the program itself dictates how the cooperation happens. And so this also showcases within the transnational governance the importance of policy arrangements and policy instruments to really shift. So more than just like these high-level documents and agreements that somehow become a bit empty in a way in definition of how things that happen within the context. And so I'll be very much interested to see your perspective on these and to receive your comments. So thank you so much. And thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions from the floor or online? If you have anyone from online?
Not yet.
What about from any of you? If not, I can ask a question.
Yeah.
6 people online.
6 people online. Okay. Let me ask a question. Well, actually, I have 2 questions. One of them is, so what exactly was this cooperation? I mean, in all the phases. I mean, is it mobility? Is it mutual funding, matching research funding? Did it involve partnerships with universities, or was all at a high level? I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about this kind of cooperation? The second one has to do with in what way was basically these agreements done concerning the position of the United States? Actually, I'm doing not exactly this research, but something similar. But I'm looking at autoship in particular fields between the US and China, European Union and China, and even the 3 collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
And something that is very clear is that the collaboration with China is essentially a US-China collaboration. This on the one hand. The European one is much, much behind, always was. But then there's also something quite interesting that kind of conflicts with this idea that you showed here, because the boom in European-China collaboration in very kind of hot fields, I mean, I'm talking AI and other fields related to defense industries and telecom industries, chip manufacturing and whatnot, are booming since the 2015 onwards, which is more or less when we say, wait a minute, that Europe is changing this. So it seems to be a disconnect between what is happening in terms of the collaborations, academic collaboration, of course, and the kind of policy kind of positioning of those countries, or particularly the EU towards China.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugo. Yes. So the first one, your first question about what is this cooperation about? It's mainly through, so from European Union, will be the participation within the framework program. And within the framework program, we have like a huge expansion of type of activities, right? For instance, like the Marie Curie fellowships, it's one of them. The European framework program within different fields of study, so not just STEM science, but also like more social science type of science. So, and also these innovation actions, that you have like from concept to market, like set of things. So it's mainly that. But what you see, okay, now we're already touching your second question. What you see is also more selective type of cooperation. That at certain point within the framework program, everything remains much stable. You keep seeing increasing, and I'm going to talk with Tali tomorrow about this. They're going to look at the themes and how then the operationalization of the program. You see an expansion, more organizations participating in more fields, but then at a certain point you see that at the high level that cooperation becomes very much concerned about climate change aspects or biodiversity, so like very specific topics or areas, let's say, not topics, but areas of research. And so you start to see like this kind of shift, into a more high-level discourse, and also like this concern about global challenges and the importance of regional blocs and countries participate and to solve these common challenges.
Right.
They are also global. But then these more niche areas that can be more problematic, like that could be commercialized, let's say,
Right.
like the shift has been like kind to draw it, or not draw it, but kind of de-escalate, let's say.
Okay. And what about the positioning of the US?
The position of the US within the summits, which is like the kind of high level where you can see actually this kind of foreign policy. There's not much information about the US or much concern, but it's a very much bilateral type of relationship. But it's something that should be interesting to look at. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
A lot of it is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Julio. See, Julio made it.
Yeah, thank you, Julio. That's great. I mean, you are being one of the inspiration also, for this work, because you've been working on this topic. So it's great to see you here. So, you can hear? Can you hear now? Is this better? Did it make it better? Yes.
Yeah.
Now, yes. Okay. Okay, let's try. So thank you, Julio. I mean, it's great to see you here. I've been following your work on this topic as well, and you have like a great paper about funding arrangements. So what I would like to do, there's a lot of policy analysis into these based on documents. My next step will try to talk with policy officers. So that will be my next step. Also, because I think there's some research done about authorship and funding arrangements as well. And I don't feel that I can contribute much more into that. And so I think what I'm doing right now, it complements what is already out there. And so this idea that you have this cooperation agreement that then unfolds into more operational type of cooperation arrangements, or gives life, let's say, to this cooperation agreement. And so I think that will be my contribution to it, like a more governance-based type of discussion. Authorship collaboration, as Hugo said, it's something that it's not something that you see a very strong basis between European Union scholars and Chinese ones. And but also there's an issue with the UFP program, because it's not really only confirmed into this outside relationship, but you also don't see a lot of cooperation among Europeans, but of organizations that participate in the European framework program. Because I also think that the majority of research that is conducted there is not basic research. They have like a more commercial type of development. So yeah, so. I hope that this satisfies your question, but I will be happy to chat with you about this.
All right, I think it's people today.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's how many countries? 27, 26? European Union, right? 26 or 7 countries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they have a same access. Do they have a same access to all these collaboration schemes, or some countries feeding in more like advantages? How does it work?
So size. Thank you for your question. I mean, size plays a huge role here for sure. The bigger the scientific systems, the bigger their capacity to attract funding. And so what happens, you have like these big five, which is Spain, France, Italy, Germany, and UK, that ended up to capture a lot of this funding. And this has been confirmed since the beginning of this program until today. And there's been efforts from the European Union to tackle this inequality, and the idea is that at certain point they placed eligibility criteria, where they have to have first Southern and Eastern European partners within the projects. And this creates a bit of some tensions, and some inequalities within the field, and also some instrumentality in organizing these projects. And this is also seen in higher education, not just in science itself, but also in higher education. You see this phenomenon happen.
I have two further questions.
Yes.
One is, so you look at the EU perspective, right? But you also look at bilateral arrangements. So to what extent are they aligned? And this leads to my second question. When it comes to bilateral arrangements, how different are these cooperations? Because if you think about Hungary, Hungary is very pro-China, right? While Lithuania has a anti-China, pro-Taiwan position. So how does this how different is it? And any hints on how this might also be influenced EU policy? Because I know EU acted with China when China penalized Lithuania. So these things are all interconnected.
Yeah, for sure. The position, one thing that I'm considering about will be like at a certain point when I have like the EU, perspective done, eventually to complement the Chinese, like having like the EU, China, and Sino-European, kind of. And there's a great paper published in the special issue where Julio also published on this aspect of Sino-European perspective on science. And the paper itself, the authors, they look that as a kind of a passive participant in the early 2000s and to a kind of a more active participant. And then that will be like 2010 until recent, and nowadays more kind of an inward global player, something that is more kind of rooted, let's say. Right. So I'm considering to, make the two speak to each other, but of course, the documents it's like official language, so of course it's already very polished, so that's why I would like to complement it with interviews with actually people who work within the policy office to explore these more. And then I haven't looked at the national case points because, of course, when I talk about these regional developments, you also have a lot of detachment or, decoupling from what happens at the regional organizations and then the national countries. But the position of the European Union, at least, what we've been doing is that not only this question of, China became like a huge player within economical aspects and other aspects, but also a geopolitical player that somehow confronts modes of governance, right? Something that they also talk about it, questions of human rights related to different aspects, also questions of the relationship of China and Hong Kong, that is also part of the documents, So there's been a lot of these concerns that at a certain point you also don't know exactly if this just justify, the cooperation, if you want to call it like that, or to change this cooperation a way that might be more instrumental to the European Union itself. You know what I mean? Like economically speaking. So you have the two ways that you can possibly see.
Yeah.
But that's certainly super interesting then to explore the visions of the member states, the European Union member states through these relationships, right?
Right.
That will be super interesting to see that. Honestly, I haven't seen any study about that. But could be the next step, yes.
Yeah.
That would be quite interesting.
All right. Any question? Any further question? No. Well, if there's no further questions.
I'm going to ask a question.
Okay.
When people online hear me, do I need to use?
Maybe
here, right? Really?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Marcelo. What I'm listening and trying to understand this topic. It's not a particularly familiar topic, but broadly it's familiar. In the field of comparative education, which is so dominated by nation states, we've got one country negotiating with a group of countries, which the group got smaller after the initial arrangement because Britain withdrew, Brexit. And then we've got Hugo's question about how the individual countries have got their own bilateral arrangements. So we've got quite a complicated arrangement, which you're then trying to frame within the theory of transnational governance and modes of gradual institutional change. Those were your words. It sounds not so gradual, it sounds quite abrupt in the recent 5 years that people set up an agreement. And then the question is, okay, what does this agreement lead to? And it then in turn brings in questions about policies. What is a policy in reality? What pretends to be a policy? You have nice words, but then how do policies get enacted and by whom? And it's much easier in China because it's a pretty centralized place. So we're talking about Beijing, and usually, but not always, when Beijing says jump, then people jump. And when Beijing says stop jumping, they stop jumping. But of course, even within China, there's great diversity. And you get to Europe, people are jumping in all different directions all the time, and it's a much more complicated arena. So then I think my question is, how do you piece all this together for conceptual understanding? What are you thinking through within your framework?
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Great question. And it is very hard and very puzzling, yes, to doing this type of research when so many things come into play, right? And so I'm not entirely sure if would consider this disruptive. I think it could be we're facing like within this theory of modes of institutional change. I think there's a disruption there. I'm not entirely sure to what extent I would consider radical or critical to a point that is going to, completely redesign, let's say, the rules of the game. I think it can be, years to come, for sure. In next year, if I attend the Comparative Education Society in Hong Kong, potentially I'm going to have a different perception of this. I don't know. But for sure, there's something going on, and you see in the document that is always, the cooperation is going on, but we are discussing, the future of this cooperation. So I'm not entirely sure what comes out, and maybe in a few years I will look back and I'll say, okay, is disruption? It's completely disruptive in a way. So yeah, for now, and also because the cooperation agreement, the document itself, the treaty that established that gives flesh, let's say, to other operational arrangements, is still very much in force. So from that point in time, we can start to see, okay, there's a drift, there might be a conversion that eventually might evolve to exhaustion. Right? There's no more cooperation, or the cooperation is going to not as profound as it was before. That's for sure.
Well, let me elaborate a bit further on complexities. Sorry to keep you running backwards. No, it's okay. Elaborating on complexities, what languages are being used here for this collaboration? China speaks Chinese, but they're probably willing to talk in English. But are they willing also to talk in Portuguese, Spanish, German, French, etc., etc., etc.? The European Union has so many languages. Yeah. And what does that mean for this so-called cooperation?
I think the documents, they are translated to all the European languages. You have most of them. They have access to them via, for instance, if I want to have access to documents in Portuguese, I'm able to do it. But then the cooperation arrangements themselves, I think there will be basically English or direct language, I believe, but I'm not entirely sure.
Which is a language which is not a native language of any European
exactly.
except Malta. Yes.
and Ireland. Yeah, so to speak, yeah. So yeah. Let's check. Do you want to?
Yeah, I guess, because they might not be hearing us very well.
Honestly, okay. I'm just thinking about two questions. One follows on Mark's question about concepts and theories. I noticed you use transnational governance. I don't know that body of work as well, but it kind of surprises me because given the topic, I would have assumed you would have used regionalization, regionalism, which is quite well published in higher education and particularly in political science. So I guess my question is, why transnational governance? Why not, for me, it's obvious I would use regionalism, regionalization. The second question is a bit more critical. I noticed you talked about China's One Belt, One Road policy. This is framed under cooperation. And there's, as you know, emerging work that, in fact, One Belt, One Road is not really cooperation. It's a strong element of domination and perhaps exploitation. So can you talk about what is going on in One Belt, One Road in Europe?
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so much. About your first question, so I don't use regionalization here because I don't think it's a regionalization phenomenon. And one of the problems, because you are basically have one region, relationships with a national country, right? So I think call it, I'm not entirely sure how to call it actually, because by the end of the day, we'll be like, I could not call it trans-regional governance because it's not about two regions, right? Looking at the regionalization as a concept, it would make sense to call it that way. And I also think that regionalization often obscures what happens within the region. And so most of the things, right, and for a moment in time, sometimes I look at the supranational governance and you have like a clear relationship, from the more macro level, that of the first European Union relationship to relationships with Portugal, Spain, France, that I think it's a more accurate term than just call it a very loose term of regionalization. And then transnational, because you ended up transnational for the good and for the worst. National presence still very much in vogue, and I think it's not conceptually right to obscure or not give the national the weight that it has. Now, of course, when we use these words, they also sometimes I'm talking with scholars about, what is transnational governance, and we have different perspectives about it. So I think there's also a lot of fine-tune work that needs to be done about these concepts. What is regionalization? What is transnational governance? What is supranational governance? What is trans-regionalization, right? Like cooperation between the European Union and the other regions. That's something that I'm also exploring now in the Philippines, trying to understand, how actually regions cooperate, and do they actually care about the region itself, or it's like more national-based interest, playing a game and using these institutions, like all these type of discussions. And so far, I think transnational governance is a more clear cut, let's say, and concept that somehow allows to have these discussions, also the position of nation states within the region and all these other things. The second question, yes, you are absolutely right. And one of the things that when I showcased you the document in 2013, that was a starting point to discuss this question, what will be the focus of this initiative? And then to what extent is just about, an initiative to enlarge cooperation within Chinese partners, let's say, or if it's something that to really showcase a more hegemonic position within that relationship. And then this is a starting point for you when you start to see this shift of this discourse within the European Union. And that's very clear since the early the first documents that started to look at the initiative. Now, of course, again, I still don't feel very comfortable because to look, now I have to shift the gears and look more into the Chinese developments to then make, a relationship between the two. But yes, it's a very important development. It for sure started to shift the gears, let's say.
Basically, the main point, I think, is that you need really to bring the politics.
The politics, I think, is going to be hard, but the policy officers maybe,
But by some events. So this is why I was bringing the US. I mean, because usually the US tends to give the first steps and Europe tends to follow. So this is why if you bring the US, you know to what extent some things might be like global geopolitical kind of events that trigger some policies or not by looking at it chronologically, for example.
Yeah.
So I'm very, one of the things that I'm quite curious is to see, at one point, the US basically forbade any contact whatsoever with what is called like the Sons and Daughters of the Nation universities, which are the universities, the 7 universities in mainland China linked to the PLA, to the army. Did Europe follow it up or not? So this is quite important because, as we know, for a really long time, even because of NATO, still exists for the time being, everything was very much connected. I mean, and we know, for example, that the US often would come to EU and to European governments and say, hey, don't allow Huawei to build infrastructure for your 5G. So it's important to see these kind of elements because I'm a bit with Mark. The last part seems very abrupt. I mean, it's basically saying that the Chinese cannot join, right? It seems very, very abrupt.
For these specific initiatives, yes, it is abrupt. But there are other, funding lines that they can participate. There's no really, a cut. But for instance, when you look at national developments, you see like bars placed between cooperation between universities, especially universities that have those ties, to government facilities, all this type of things, military, and all this type of things. You start to see, like for instance, you see some shifts within Germany,
right?
Like some careful partnerships, developments there. And I think there is another country that I'm not entirely sure if it was a Nordic country, but for Germany, yeah, there's already some discussion about this. Yeah.
So you can divide it. Of course, I know this is polemic, but you can divide this between knowledge and technology.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Because maybe each tells a different story. Because maybe this abruptness is happening on the technology side, but not so much on the research side.
Yeah. Everything that is like commercially based that involves. So of course, basic research, I think somehow, the blue skies research, somehow it should continue in a way that it's more or less problematic. But the technological and commercialized research, yes, for sure it has an impact. And you start to see these, not just in innovation actions, but within discourse around, we should be careful. Yeah. So let's see what the next years will bring.
What about the Luxembourg? Yeah. What is the
position of Luxembourg? We're talking about countries within the EU. What about Luxembourg, where you are based?
Yeah.
And its cooperation with China. Can you shed light on that?
So Luxembourg has a tradition of being a very dependent country within the region, right? I mean, it's a very powerful small state that benefit tremendously within the greater region, but you have to have like very close ties. And so there's very strong ties within the greater region, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, and France. But the science system is very small, just have one university, one funding agency. So it's really, really small. So it's not a
one university?
Yes, one university. Yeah. So it's not really like a big European player in some sort of way. Of course, the university has cooperation ties for mobility, with Asian universities in China, in
Does it have an equal vote within the European Union? Perhaps it's bigger than in the United Nations and UNESCO. It's one country, one vote. So China has the same number of votes as Chile, whatever else beginning with C, or Luxembourg or anything else.
Yeah.
So Luxembourg
It should
is,
have, yes.
Same in the EU.
Yeah,
It's the same.
Yeah.
yes,
One country, one vote.
one country, one vote. So it's a pretty powerful country.
Yes.
The population of
Yes, yes. But they foster relationships with China. There's Confucius Institute, in the University of Luxembourg, that they foster relationships with China. But now, science and technology, I'm not entirely sure, because even the research fabric, let's say, of Luxembourg, it's very much European centered and national based. But yeah, it would be a good further line of research. Thank you.
Maybe you and Julio could look at the evolution of China-Europe collaboration in patents.
That'll be super interesting to see, because then the story should also be interesting in recent years to see the shift happening. Yeah, for sure. So, Julia, did you hear?
All right. Any final question? All right. So I think we're all happy. So I guess
So
we
thank
can
you so
wrap up.
much.
Thank you. Okay.